Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Sabrina Dent, Director of the BJC Center for Faith, Justice, and Reconciliation. And I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Protect Our Children and Public Schools, Stop the Big, Beautiful Bill. For those of you who are not familiar with the BJC, the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, we are an 89-year-old nonprofit faith-based organization headquartered in Washington, D.C., that fights to advance faith freedom for all by protecting church state separation. And this is really critical as we navigate our current moral crisis in America. So I want to really speak to you in this moment from the heart, not as a policy expert and not as a religious freedom advocate, but as a single mother. A hard-working, tax-paying mother who sends her son to public school for a quality education, where he can meet children and learn from children from diverse racial, ethnic, economic, religious, and non-religious gender and sexual identities with learning differences of all sorts. A mother who's had to lean on Medicaid and SNAP when times got tough. A mother who knows what it means to work hard and still come up short because my ends did not meet. And I know that a bill like this, what it means for families like mine, including many grocery store employees, sanitation workers, educators, daycare workers, nurses, Uber and Lyft drivers, and those that work in food services as well as transportation services. Basically, all the people who became essential workers during the pandemic because they have always been essential to us. So let me be clear about something in this moment. We were told that this was coming. The authors of Project 2025, that 900-page document that was written by the Heritage Foundation, they were very explicit and detailed in their plans to gut the Department of Education and to maximize school choice programs while cutting funding and summer food programs at public schools. This big, beautiful bill isn't just a policy on paper. This budget is a punch to the gut of those that are working Americans and working people across this country. This bill is so big and beautiful. It gives tax cuts to billionaires, but yet it guts healthcare and damages public schools and takes food off of our tables and strips away environmental protections. And then it asks us to say thank you. Well, not today. In the words of Miriam Wright Edelman, founder of the Children's Defense Fund, there should be not one new dime in tax breaks for billionaires and billionaires as long as millions of children in America are poor, hungry, uneducated, or without health coverage. So today, we're focusing on three of the most destructive provisions that are in this bill: a national school voucher program that drains public funds into private hands and chips away at church state separation. We're going to look at the cuts to Medicaid and the harmful changes to Medicare that will hit the most vulnerable people in our communities, especially seniors and people living with disabilities. And we're also going to look at the reductions to SNAP. Most people know this as food stamps, the very program that keeps food on the table for children, for seniors, and struggling college students and working families. Today, you're going to hear from three fierce voices who work for organizations that are in the fight with us. Those individuals are Maggie Siddiqui, the policy advisor at BJC, who will walk us through what's at stake with school vouchers. Laura Peralti Schulte, the senior director at Network Lobby, will break down healthcare threats buried in this bill. And Sakina Shabazz, the deputy director at Bread for the World, will speak on the consequences of gut and SNAP. But I want you to understand that we're not just here to bear witness. No, I want you to understand that this bill is currently with the Senate. And that means that we're here to show up, to speak out, and take action. And so, yes, there will be a call to action that we're going to give to you because it's not enough for us to listen and learn, but we must do something. Our children, our grandchildren, our neighbors, and families are dependent on us. So I want to encourage you to tell others on social media what is happening right now. I want you to tag them and tag BJC onto this program using using the handle at BJC on the Hill. And I also want us to remember not to get comfortable nor complicit in this moment because too many lives are on the line. But I do want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us for today. Thank you for caring enough to listen. And so, with that, I want to introduce our first speaker of the day, Maggie Siddiqui. Mackey serves as the policy advisor to BJC, the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. She is a consultant specializing in faith-based advocacy for social change, coalition building across lines of difference, and public policy on religious freedom and standing up against hate. Maggie recently concluded her appointment to the office of the U.S. Secretary of Education, where she served as the director of the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Prior to joining the Biden-Harris administration, she served as senior director of the religion and faith team at the think tank, the Center for American Progress. She spent nearly a decade before that in national organizations serving American Muslim communities. With that, I want to invite Maggie to tell us more about what's at stake for public education. Maggie.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sabrina, and for organizing this today. It is so incredibly important, and I've felt incredibly honored since my time serving in the U.S. Department of Education to now be with the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, which has been such an important champion on issues related to public education. The sad part of this, of course, is that there has been a lot to do to protect public education these past few months, and very concerningly in this reconciliation bill specifically. So, to dive in, what is buried in this allegedly big, beautiful bill? I use that word buried on purpose. What's buried in it is a big, bad betrayal of our kids. This bill, many don't realize, this bill includes a national school voucher program, which would rob our children's schools of resources to line the pockets of billionaires. Now, I'll get into how that happens in just a moment. But what I want you to understand is this. This would be our nation's first ever national private school voucher program. It has never existed before for good reason. People across the political spectrum do not like school vouchers. This program had to be buried in a larger must-pass reconciliation bill because its proponents know it could not pass on its own. In fact, voters across the country have opposed private school vouchers. Just last year in 3 states, Kentucky, Nebraska, and Colorado, there were statewide referendums to create school vouchers, and voters across the political spectrum soundly rejected them. Voucher measures that have been, every time they've been on the ballot, 17 times total in states across the country, they have been rejected. But the proponents of this bill are not really particularly interested in what people want or even what states want, it seems, because the proposal would even impose vouchers on states that don't have programs already. They didn't want them. America has an incredibly decentralized education system. We strongly emphasize local control of education funding and policy, but this program would force those states even to have voucher programs while denying them proper oversight of the schools receiving those funds in their states. So why is this happening? Why are we proposing $5 billion per year? Why is Congress proposing $5 billion per year in taxpayer dollars to go to private schools? Who really benefits here is the wealthy. How this works is through a tax credit program. So bear with me because I'm also not a tax expert here, but I think this is super important. And so I've been listening closely to folks in the tax policy space. Wealthy individuals would give to intermediary organizations. These are called scholarship granting organizations, which then write checks for tuition at private school. In return, those wealthy individuals would not receive a tax deduction. They would get 100% back. It's a dollar for dollar tax credit. They would get 100% of whatever they gave to that scholarship granting organization back in their pockets. So, um, and it's even worse than that because they wouldn't just get 100%. As it turns out, they could get even more back, right? So the proposal includes a lucrative tax shelter designed to entice wealthy people to give money to vouchers in order to avoid paying capital gains tax. So taxpayers could contribute marketable securities. So this is like could be like corporate stock to scholarship granting organizations with and then not pay any federal or state capital gains tax on the profits from selling those stock. So this is a great deal for wealthy individuals, right? Accountants and financial advisors would tell their clients, even if their clients don't care about school vouchers, give to this, and not only will you get your money back, you'll get it, you'll avoid paying the taxes further. So the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy found that, by way of example, if former Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos wanted to, based on her financial situation, she could probably and then donate and then receive back more than $10 million in tax credits and then garner an additional profit of $1.4 million in capital gains tax avoidance. So that's who benefits. Who's paying for the wealthy to get all of these perks? The answer is almost every child in America because there are 90% of America's students attend public schools. And first and foremost, what happens when a small number of children leave the public school system and go to private schools? Well, the school often receives less money because resources are often allocated to schools based on how many students are there. But even if there are fewer students, the school needs to keep the lights on still. They still have to pay for the air conditioning, the heating. They still have to pay for those buses, right? No matter how many students there are sort of these fixed costs. And so schools are forced to make all kinds of different cuts, right? Some schools, particularly in rural areas, will be forced to close altogether. Rural public schools are frequently the largest employer in the community, and adults and children alike depend on them for resources, for economic growth. Oftentimes, private schools aren't even an option, right, in rural areas. And so that yet those students are still having to subsidize those private schools and getting that money diverted away from their own school system. We cannot afford to subsidize a second private system of education when our public schools are already underfunded. And by the way, vouchers often go to students who never attended public schools in the first place, right? In states with existing voucher programs, 70% of the students receiving vouchers are those already attending private schools. So another way that students are harmed is that supporters of this bill talk about vouchers being a matter of school choice. That's the language that's often used. But vouchers really give a choice to private schools, not to parents and students. Private schools that take taxpayer-funded vouchers are often denying students admission. They're able to expel them, discriminate against them for any number of reasons, including their disability status, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, English language ability, academic ability, disciplinary history, ability to pay tuition, what their family looks like. Private schools funded by taxpayer dollars through this program would not be bound by many key provisions in civil rights laws. And let's be clear, taxpayer dollars should never go to support discrimination, should never be allowed to go to things that are only available to a select few. And public schools must be fully funded so that the supports they can provide, particularly to students with disabilities, right? Like things like specialized instruction, speech, physical, and occupational therapy, that those can be provided to fully meet every student's needs. And those are really critical components of public schools. Just to name what I said earlier about this dollar for dollar tax credit, I really like this visual that some of our partners in the National Coalition for Public Education provided. If Congress were to pass this bill, essentially our government would be saying that donations to vouchers are worth 3 times as much to the government as donations to homeless shelters, to food banks, to houses of worship, other institutions that are really supporting our communities, right? So this proposal really privileges those contributions to private school vouchers by giving you that dollar for dollar tax credit back if you gave to that, rather than that that tax deduction that's usually maximum like 37%. That is, I think, really problematic in terms of, what we're saying the value of those various things are in our society. So besides this potential, harm in terms of disincentivizing giving to some of these other institutions, what does this mean to, why is this harming religious liberty? Why is this something that the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty is playing such an active role in? And there are really three key reasons that I just wanted to focus on here. So one is vouchers harm public schools, and public schools protect our religious freedom. Public schools are the only education system where religious expression is protected for all students, no matter their faith. So when I was at the US Department of Education, we updated the federal guidance on longstanding constitutional protections for prayer and religious expression in public and elementary and secondary schools. Right? This is one of my main jobs was working on this kind of thing. The free exercise of religion, right? The ability of all students to show up and bring their full religious or non-religious identities into a classroom, right? To be their full selves, to engage in privately, right? Student-led prayer. Like that is something that's fully protected in a public school. And really that only public schools can fully allow. Students are guaranteed that right every day, but not so in private schools. A student loses some of those First Amendment rights in addition to other civil rights. They don't have to be accommodated in the same ways. And taxpayer dollars shouldn't be provided to anything that isn't open to all. Second, the government should not compel taxpayers to furnish funds in support of a religion with which they disagree, or even a religion with which they agree, right? I mean, parents certainly may choose a religious education for their children. But to insist that taxpayers pay for that religious education is the part that's really questionable here. Government can't pay for two education systems. We have a choice already, right? To either a free public education or to a private education that the government won't pay for. And so third and relatedly, we're also concerned about, the entanglement that vouchers have of government with religion, right? Private schools are often religious. And while government funding often does go to faith-based institutions that provide social services, right, they separate those religious activities from the social services that they're providing to the public. But no such separation is really possible with schools, nor are schools very, that are faith-based in nature really interested in that separation, right? That's core to their mission and who they are, right? The integration of religious instruction in that education is often why parents want to send their kids to those schools. Right. And at BJC, we strongly believe that religious instruction is best left to our houses of worship and other religious institutions. BJC continues the long Baptist heritage of people like Roger Williams, the Baptist minister who preached soul freedom back in the 1600s, was banished for it from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and then established the colony of Rhode Island as an experiment to protect the liberty of conscience. And I mentioned him because he said he wanted to keep, quote, a wall of separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world, end quote. And so that is such an important thing that we're trying to protect. And where this school voucher program, in addition to all the other harms I named, really feels like a strong threat here to religious liberty. And so we really have been uplifting that with members of Congress. And so to that end, we have had together with our partners in the National Coalition for Public Education, we've had some really good meetings with members of Congress about this, who I think really understand our concerns And I have to tell you, they're not always a big fan of school vouchers themselves, but they need to hear from their constituents about it. They need to know that you care and that you will hold them accountable if they vote in favor of a national school voucher program. So I know we're going to come back more into sort of what you can do most specifically in a few minutes after our other speakers have gone here. But I just want to emphasize, tell your members of Congress no vouchers and no to this big bad betrayal of our kids. And I think we'll drop a link in the chat if we haven't already to the action alert that we sent out that you can click on, but we'll circle back in just a few moments on what else you can do. Thank you so much, Sabrina. Back to you.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you. That information was so important because it is critically important that parents and caregivers, educators, everyone understands what's at stake and what's in this bill. And so, yes, thank you for stating that call to action that people need to contact their elected officials. So, with that, I want to now pivot the conversation to focus on what's going to happen with Medicaid and Medicare. So, I want to introduce our second speaker, Laura Peralta Schulte, who is the Senior Director of Public Policy and Government Relations at Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice, where she leads the development and execution of the organization's advocacy agenda across a broad spectrum of economic, social, and racial justice issues. Since 2014, Laura has guided Network's government relations strategy and managed its policy team and served as a core advisor to congressional leadership. She brings decades of policy expertise, including senior roles in both the corporate and education sectors. And she previously served as the director of global government affairs at Warner Lambert Company, where she led high impact global lobbying efforts. She also spent 6 years as a high school social studies teacher in Fairfax County, where she developed innovative, equity driven instructional models. And so I want to turn it over to Laura. Tell us what's happening with Medicaid and Medicare.
All I can say, the old history teacher in me, when Maggie was sharing a conversation about Roger Williams, I was just getting so excited. It is good to bring the history into the debate. So thank you so much, Dr. Dent, for having me here with you today. I am thrilled. I just want to ground us before we talk about the healthcare piece, just to make sure we are setting just a firm belief among ourselves, those of us who are gathered today. We are from many different faith traditions, and yet all of our faith traditions believe that we are made in the image and likeness of God, and that our people deserve to thrive, not just to survive. So when we're looking at this big, ugly betrayal, I believe, as Maggie just said, let's make sure we understand that this bill is funding the school vouchers, the tax cuts for the wealthiest among us who actually don't need them, and they're paying for it by taking away health care for so many of us and taking food off the table of our kids. I don't think we can say that enough. I think Network and all of our partners also believe that healthcare cannot be a privilege for those fortunate enough to be able to pay for it. It should be a right in this country, as it is a right in so many places. So, with that in mind, I do want to kind of refresh people's memory about Medicaid, because when you think of Medicaid or you think about the Affordable Care Act, it is critical to understand that there are millions and millions of people that rely on these programs every day just to live. We cannot live without our health care. And so we've got to make sure that we gathered here today do everything we can to protect it from being cut. So who gets Medicaid? We want to look at kind of just some data, just so to kind of bring the community in front of us today. 2 out of every 5 babies born in the United States are born through with Medicaid funding. 2 in 5 kids get their health care through Medicaid. 1 in 6 non-elderly adults Think about your student that maybe just graduated college, is in a kind of a low paying job, that doesn't have health insurance. Think about your Uber driver, others that Dr. Dent mentioned at the top of the hour, in terms of whose jobs just don't have it. But it is critical in order to maintain working. 2 out of 5 non-elderly adults with disabilities are on Medicaid. A great success story in terms of how we have been able to, as a country, begin to tackle what is a major issue for so many of us living with mental illness. 1 in 4 folks are getting their health care for their mental health concerns through Medicaid. And importantly, 3 in 5 nursing home facility residents are getting their coverage for that nursing home through Medicaid as well. Now, let me just take a little note before I go to my next slide on that, because Dr. Dent mentioned Medicaid and Medicare, and it's very important to understand the risk to both programs. Why? Because, as many may understand, Medicare does not cover the nursing home facilities. And so there is something called dual enrollment. Those are elderly individuals who are signed up both for Medicare and for Medicaid. And again, it is the nursing homes, very dependent on that Medicaid funding, that stand to really come up short if this bill passes without any changes. Let me go to my next slide. I'm sorry, I'm just having a hard time getting it to my next slide. I'm wondering if somebody can maybe give a little assist here.
Laura, if you use your arrow, are you able to?
Yeah, I think it is, something is just blocked here. I'm
Okay.
wondering if Kaylee can just give me a hand.
While you're doing that, I want to encourage people to start thinking about questions that you have for our presenters, and you can put those in the Q&A area to respond, for them to respond to, because there is so much at stake
Yeah.
right
Why
now.
don't I just do this? I'm just going to talk old fashioned style,
Yes, please.
and then we will take it up from here. And I will make sure that everybody gets the slides when we move forward. So, in terms of the cut to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act in this bill, what we have is we have $715 billion in cuts to Medicaid. That is the largest cut to this program that we have ever seen in the history of the program. At the same time, you have almost $100 billion taken away from the Affordable Care Act. So, what does that mean? That means that there are $1 trillion coming out of our primary healthcare programs that will be used to fund healthcare. Let me again put this in perspective. We are talking about 70 million people that get their healthcare through Medicaid. We are also talking about 24 million people who get their health care through the Affordable Care Act. So the risk to this bill to millions and millions is incredible. What we do know is that new numbers are coming out in terms of who will lose health care. And we know that according to the bill, now almost 16 million people will become uninsured by 2034. Let's talk about the ways that they take away health care. The first way they do it is to make sure that people are loaded up in terms of meeting paperwork requirements to even get access to the program. Their plan is to, as you both sign up for the Affordable Care Act, I'm sorry, for Medicaid, as well as on a continual basis. They're in the statute currently does not say how many times the state can ask you to re-up your Medicaid work requirement in terms of reporting. But what we know is that this adds an incredible difficulty, particularly for people who are working and those who are not. So when you look at who loses healthcare from that alone, we know that millions will do that. And again, unlike other programs, this is going to be a first time for these kinds of work reporting requirements. Now, they've been tested in a couple of states already with really bad results. I'm just going to tell you about one, and that is Georgia. Georgia has had work requirement for a number of years since 2023. Currently, after all that time, only 77,000 people, or 3% of those who should be on Medicaid, have it. Why does the data show that people can't get it? Because the bureaucracy is slow, because they miss an email, because people live very complicated lives. And importantly, remember from Georgia, these are people who should be getting Medicaid. So this is an extraordinary problem in terms of one way that people will lose their coverage. The second way, in addition to this red tape, is that for the first time, they are adding barriers to coverage in terms of enrollment in both Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. So not only do you have to show that you are working in terms of Medicaid, as the program moves on, you're barred from even getting on that program if you're not working, or if you're working 30 hours a month because of a sporadic work. And we know this happens all over the country. Seasonal workers, for example, are really disadvantaged by these eligibility requirements. So that, again, is kind of a second additional paper requirement that really will knock out many, many people from coverage in terms of healthcare. What this bill does also is take away coverage from immigrants who are living lawfully in the United States. I'll go a little bit deeper on that in a minute. It also adds new out-of-pocket costs for many folks to even get coverage. And then once you have coverage, it allows states to charge you. Let me give you an example of that. Under these Medicaid changes, what happens is a state can actually require folks to pay $35 per visit on Medicaid. $35 per visit. Now, for some of us, that may not sound too bad. Many of us are used to, in the Affordable Care Act, having those kinds of barriers or extra costs. But when you are a family struggling to put food on the table, what does that make you do? It makes you stop and say, do I feed my children with that $35, or do I go to the doctor? Do I pay for my medicine, or do I pay my rent? These are the kind of choices that people are going to be forced to make, and that is wrong. Finally, in terms of the other way that leads to the 6 million folks who will not have health care, it is a cut that the bill has in terms of a very important achievement to get folks signed up for the Affordable Care Act. Because up until the last couple of years, there was a gap in coverage between people who could qualify for Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, because premiums are expensive, even with the Affordable Care Act. So the innovation of the last couple of years under the Biden administration was to subsidize folks making just a little bit more than who would qualify for Medicaid, so that they could get health care for themselves and their families. So, taken together, these are exactly the provisions that are going to pull healthcare away from folks. If you look at the vast majority of who gets hurt, the vast majority, it is incredibly skewed to people because of the work requirements and the eligibility rules. So, yes, there's some cost sharing that happens coming out of the House bill, but the vast majority of the 16 million who lose their coverage do so because of these new work reporting requirements. Friends, we have met with so many members of Congress on the Republican side, pleading for them to strip out these work requirements, and they seem to me to be pretty set. So that is why this is important, because it's got to allow folks to get up on that hill and make some noise. Now, if you also look at who gets hurt, you've got to understand that in many respects, this is kind of picking on a few states, and particularly the states who have moved so beautifully to expand Medicaid to populations that have been historically left out and left behind. So one of the slides that you're going to see after this relates to different states. And if you look at the states that are very hard hit, it is Virginia, it is New Jersey, it is Montana, it is California, Nevada. These are the states that are going to lose over 13%, billions and billions of dollars in terms of the cuts that are on the table. All again to pay for health care for the wealthy.
Laura, thank you so much for what you've shared. I know there's so much more that has to be shared about what's at stake, and we actually have people that have put questions in the chat for you. So we will need to move forward so we can get Sakina in here right before we cover. But I appreciate something that you stated very explicitly about saying the difficult choices that people will have to make in deciding between rent or paying for medication or paying for food for their families, because those things are real. So I just want to say thank you for bringing the realities of it to us. And we're going to come back to you because there's a call to action, and I know you have one. So I want to next thank you so much, Laura. So Sakina, I want to invite you to come on and just and to introduce Sakina. Sakina Shabazz is the Deputy Director of Bread for the World's Policy and Research Institute. And prior to this role, Sakina served and was appointed as Senior Policy Advisor at the United States Department of Agriculture for Food and Nutrition Service under the Biden-Harris administration. Before joining the USDA, Sakina served as the Policy Director at Berkeley Food Institute and Senior Program Associate at the Congressional Hunger Center and Program Associate at DC Hunger Solutions. She earned her Master of Public Policy degree from Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley and a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from Georgetown University. And she's originally from San Diego, California, but resides in Washington, D.C. So I want to turn it over to Sakina to share more about what's at stake for SNAP and for these food nutrition programs.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dent. Just confirming that you all can see my slides from the beginning.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It is so good to be here. Thank you for that introduction. I'm here to talk about some of the provisions and cuts to SNAP in the One Big Beautiful Bill, also known as HR 1, in the House. And as was mentioned, I'm Sakina Shabazz. I'm the Deputy Director at Bread for the World Policy and Research Institute. I'll just give a quick overview of our time together. I'm going to talk a bit about bread and bread PRI, a snapshot of SNAP and food insecurity in the U.S., a quick overview of the SNAP provisions in HR 1 or the House Reconciliation Bill or the Big Beautiful Bill. We have a few names to choose from, and what those proposed cuts look like, anticipated impacts, why this matters, and what our call to action is for you all. So Bread for the World is a Christian advocacy organization We are celebrating 50 years this year. We were started by a cadre of reverends in New York City doing grassroots work and have expanded to do policy and government relations and so many other things in the fight against domestic and international hunger. We educate and equip people to advocate for programs and policies that end hunger. And we also analyze hunger, food insecurity, its root causes and strategies to end it, especially within the Policy and Research Institute. And we also work to inform our broader policy change agenda at BRED with clear evidence-based storytelling and data. And just on a sort of week-to-week, day-to-day, month-to-month basis, we produce reports, briefs, fact sheets, and do internal and external public education similar to what we're doing now. Just to give a quick overview of SNAP and food insecurity in the US, this data is pulled from the USDA Economic Research Service and reflects data from fiscal year 23. A really important sort of policy holiday in this arena is when the household food insecurity data is released every September. So that's going to come out in a few months, but the data that we have access to right now is from fiscal year 23. And what that data showed to us is that 47 million people were food insecure in 2023. And of that number, about 1 in 10 were children. That is a measure of food insecurity based off of specific metrics from the agency, but we also have data to reflect SNAP participation itself. So in that same fiscal year, there were about 42.1 million people participating in SNAP. And of households, about 21.4 million were participating in SNAP. The average monthly benefit was around $211.93. And in terms of the entire US population, about 12.6% of the entire US population participated in SNAP. And the total federal spending was around $112 billion. And this graphic on the left here shows spending on food assistance programs at the USDA. And we can see that SNAP takes up a pretty big portion of that, but that is proportional to the reality of hunger and food insecurity in this country, and also captures other important nutrition programs like pandemic EBT, like summer EBT, like WIC, other programs that we also care about. But that's just a schematic of the spending there. And so when we talk about this big, beautiful bill, and we're talking about SNAP, one of the most important and impactful programs when it comes to addressing hunger and food insecurity in this country, this is the largest cut we've ever seen to SNAP in the history of this program's existence. It comes out to about $290 billion in cuts over 10 years. This reflects about a 30% reduction in spending for SNAP compared to spending in the past. And it does a few things. It significantly increases administrative costs that states would also have to take on. And it would tie error rates for SNAP to the amount of funding that states might be expected to put forward due to the new provisions in this bill. And it's also really important to know we are talking about a piece of legislation that has made its way through the House. There is companion legislation in the Senate as well, but a lot of the text of what we've seen came through the House Agriculture Committee. But when it makes it to the House floor, all members of Congress are voting on this bill, and this is the version that passed. It is not all said and done yet, but is very concerning in the meantime. So here are a list of some of the things, some of the provisions in the House Reconciliation Bill that would affect SNAP. And some of them are adjustments to existing provisions within the program, and some of them are new and ultimately very concerning. So we would see changes to the age requirements for able-bodied adults without dependents that tie back to work requirements, the age of dependent children in households where work requirements might be required. We are seeing for the first time states being required to pay a portion of SNAP benefits. Historically, the federal government has always paid 100% of benefits that end up on an EBT card that someone ultimately redeems at a SNAP retailer like a grocery store. We are also seeing a decrease in the federal contribution towards the administrative costs. Historically, the federal government pays 50% and states pay 50%. In the big, beautiful bill, the contribution from the federal government would fall to 25%, and states would have to take on 75% of the cost of administering the program. We also see freezes to the Thrifty Food Plan, which are responsive to increase in inflation and food costs. We see changes to the eligibility for certain non-citizen populations who will be participating in SNAP. changes to SNAP Ed, and also changes to the standard utility allowances and the low income heating and adjustment program, or LIHEAP, as well. This is a lot of information, so I'm going to try to glaze over them, but I really want to give you a sense of where some of these cost savings are supposed to be coming from. And so with the AVOD work requirement, increasing the age cap from 55 to 65 years old would be particularly hard on older adults, and especially older adults who have caregiving roles for younger people in their lives. We also see the lowering of the age cap on dependent children from 17 years old to 6 years old. What that means is if there's a SNAP household and there are children under the age of 17, the work requirement would not be in place on that particular adult who has the care of those dependents. What this new provision is saying is that once that child turns 7 years old, you are now back to required to perform the work requirements to maintain your eligibility for SNAP. We all know that caring for young people is very, very difficult. And so that provision is particularly concerning. When it comes to the cost share for SNAP benefits, again, the federal government has historically covered all benefits that end up on an EBT card. And beginning at the beginning of FY28, states will be required to pay a minimum of 5% there. With the adjustments to the Thrifty Food Plan, one of the important pieces there is that the adjustments that come from the Thrifty Food Plan allow for food inflation to be accounted for and to reflect really what the cost of food is, and freezing that would be really hard on households. And then also, we already talked about the lowering of the federal contribution on states. And then changes to the standard utility allowance. It would only allow for households with elderly persons or disabled persons to be able to claim that standard utility allowance, and would require everyone else to provide documentation of their utility costs, which can vary from county to county, which vary significantly from state to state. And it also would no longer count standard internet costs as a deductible expense. Importantly, on the non-citizen SNAP participation, it would restrict eligibility for refugees, for asylum seekers, and immigrants fleeing domestic violence and other difficult circumstances. And related to SNAP Ed, it would essentially eliminate the grant program that funds that, and that diminishes the importance of nutrition education and the promotion of healthy eating habits. Some of the anticipated impacts here include enrollment of fewer people in SNAP by states, approval of lower benefit amounts to account for those increased costs on states. We also can expect to see decreased economic activity with SNAP retailers, and even potentially lower rates of employment within those retailers, which was an analysis done by the National Grocers Association. And above all, increases in hunger, poverty, and food insecurity, higher participation in emergency food operators like food banks, and also rippling effects potentially on school meal participation due to direct certification being tied for some school meal participants to SNAP. That is not something that we want to see. And why this matters. This is a threat to human health, to human flourishing, and taking care of God's creation. As a faith-based organization, we are deeply concerned with all people and their ability to take care of themselves, to take care of their loved ones. And it is a moral imperative for us to speak up on this. It would increase food and economic hardship on families that are already struggling. And this bill centers the wealthiest Americans at the expense of the poorest Americans, and that is unacceptable. Our call to action is to keep speaking up about this with your members of Congress. We also invite you to organize your church. One of our strongest tools at Bread for the World is what we call an offering of letters, where we organize churches to write letters to their members of Congress on a particular issue and hand deliver them and ask that member to support the issue that we care about. We also encourage you to capture stories and share them with your elected officials, and also to organize with your state leaders. These costs are going to be put on your state legislature, on your governors, and they're going to have to figure out where that money comes from. This is an opportunity to get organized and to make sure that these challenges don't persist. We would love to stay connected. Here's our contact information, and I can't wait to take your questions until the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sakina. I appreciate you sharing this information and also breaking down the information about the eligibility requirements, right? Dropping down to 6 years old. So we know 6-year-old that's a baby. So there's so much to be stated about this. What I would like to do is, because we have 10 minutes left for the call, I would like to invite all the speakers to come back on the screen. Thank you all so much. If you could stop your share, that would be great. And then we could have Laura and Maggie to join us back on the screen together so we can see one another. And so with that, I have some questions. There are lots of great questions in the chat. So one of the things someone asked if I want to start with this because you gave a call to action, Sakina, and you talked about the bill and the pieces that are on the bill, and you talk about contacting your elected officials. Somebody asked the question, do the individual calls to congressional offices make a difference? I'm gonna personally say yes. I have personally made the phone call. I have the number memorized because that's how much I have contacted my elected official. So, yes, it does make a difference when they can hear your story and you tell them. And for those officials for those that are opposing these bills and these provisions, say thank you. Like, say thank you that they're out there, but then urge them to tell their colleagues to do the same. So, Zakina, the question that I have for you is someone asked, can you point to specific pages or references in the section of the bill where there are the cuts? So when they talk to their representatives, they can say, if you go to page so and so, if you go to this section. So someone asked that question in the chat. And you can respond to
Absolutely.
that, Laura, if you have that as well, Maggie.
Yes, if you literally type into congress.gov HR1 or House Resolution 1, that is the bill or the one big beautiful bill. And one easy way to do that is to do a control F search to be able to get to the provisions on SNAP. But each section of the bill is demarcated out by the different programs that would be changed. And there are probably 2 to 3 sections on those SNAP provisions. Congress.gov is your friend. That is an official government website where that information lives. There was also an analysis done by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities that indicates out section by section where you can find that, and I would be happy to share that link. But most importantly, being a constituent of that member office is what will get their attention. Sometimes at Bread for the World, if we ask for a meeting and we don't have the constituent in tow, they will not meet with us. But one of the important things that we do have is an organized body across the country through our organizing and faith engagement team. So yes, they want to hear from you. If they don't hear from you, write a letter, show up again, meet with a staffer, find them in district, especially in August. They are elected by a public body and they have a responsibility to listen to their constituents. And oftentimes stories move the needle. Bring it back home and share that with those members. That's what I would say to that.
Thank you, Sakina. Laura, can you respond to this question? And you can probably tie in your answer to that. Can you explain for those that are watching this, because this is a big civics education like lesson for a lot of people.
Yep.
Can you explain the bill passing process, which I know it can be very long, right? So we have to get the truncated version of
No,
it.
you are getting the,
Yes.
to me, that is the best question right now because they're trying to pass this bill by the 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
And so I cannot stress to you the urgency to pick up your phone as we have all been saying to try to muck this up. It doesn't matter if you have a Democrat or a Republican, they both need to hear about this bill. Perfectly timed tonight, we will probably get the bill text on the Senate side related to Medicaid and to taxes. So that is the marker that the Senate is going to put down later on this evening. We will have information that clarifies what the heck is in that bill. There is still time to change it. But we are on a fast track, and it's really critical to get yourself organized and move. I will say that the pieces that we are going to be putting in the chat later on is a toolkit that we put together that has language you can use in addition to your stories to send to members. There's also kind of a handy dandy piece of that is just an email that you can send to shortcut the process if you don't have the time to look for the bill. Lives are on stake. There is data from UPenn and from Yale that show that millions will die every year if they do not have health care. This is a life and death situation, all to fund tax cuts for people who don't need it. We've got to stop it, and we need your help to do it.
Thank you so much, Laura. Speaking of tax cuts and people who don't need money, let's go back to the public school situation, right? And those that are trying to take money to go towards private education or private religious education explicitly. So, Maggie, the question that someone poses, how do we protect students in states that are attacking the separation of church and state? You know, where we see like the Ten Commandments and the Bible curriculum popping up. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question because we are fighting to protect religious freedom for students on multiple fronts right now. So, number one, by protecting public education, right? Period. And number two, right? Yes, through, challenging some of these really harmful attempts to just undermine the Establishment Clause, right? To undermine the separation of church and state, which does violate the religious freedom of our students. There were a couple of links that I dropped in the Q&A, and hopefully we can drop in the chat as well that give more information about how BJC is mobilizing on this. I do want to note, just in terms of a general ability to take action, but also specifically on some of this local legislation. BJC does have local groups across the country, and so here's the QR code and also an email address so that you could get linked up to local groups there, including in North Texas, so you can take action on those fronts as well. Because I know sometimes, right, like showing up at those members of Congress offices and showing up at town halls, like, you need a crew to go with. And so whether that's going to your local PTA or some other group or finding folks through BJC, you have options. There are lots of people that are concerned here.
Thank you so much. I have one more question, and then I'm gonna ask you all to give your call to action, and then we're gonna wrap this up. But the work doesn't stop, right? The work doesn't stop. All of us have a responsibility. So, Laura, this question is actually for you. From your slide had takeaways coverage from immigrants living lawfully in the United States. Someone asked the question, what does that mean? What does that mean for legal residents, those with
Yep.
temporary protective status? So
So there were certain states, in my mind, did the right thing by using their state funding to provide health care for some legal residents, like DACA recipients, like those on TPS. This bill will preclude that. It shuts it down. It shuts off the ability of a state government to decide to expand coverage to those populations. So it is just another way to hurt immigrants. They're hurt throughout the bill, but it is pernicious because, again, it leads to death. So let's kill this bill.
thank you so much, Laura, Sakina, and Maggie. I give you for 30 seconds, last minute call to action that you want people to do. What would you say to those that are watching? They might not be caught up in all the policy language and everything like that, but in their everyday communities, what would you say to those individuals? Sakina, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll just hop in quickly. Continue serving your community, especially if there is an opportunity to support people who are going to emergency food operators. And also, if there's an opportunity to support application assistance for things like SNAP and WIC, definitely support that. If you are part of a church that is looking to get organized, that wants to be involved in policy, Bread for the World has a network of churches across the country who participate in our offering of letters, who work with our organizing teams and have a resource in us in DC and in their states and regions to get involved in this. If folks want to do that, I can put my email address there. You can also just go to bread.org. We have that URL, and we can get you connected on the ground if you're interested in doing that. I hope we hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie?
Make as much noise as possible. And as I said, teaming up with local groups to do that, right? Whether it's through your house of worship, through your PTA, there are so many others that want to get involved. I'd also say reach out to your local elected officials because sadly, what's going to happen when the federal government starts making these cuts? The state and local governments are going to be left holding the bill. Right. And so they're going to need your support. They're also going to have some ideas probably about how to strategize to get that money back. And so they can be also helpful partners in your work as well. So reach out to them or other people to hold accountable, depending on where you live. So reach out to them as well at the local level.
Thank you, Maggie. Laura.
We are at a sacred moment, my friends, where you count, your voice counts, and the voice of your community counts. So we are going to give you all the tools you need to send an email, to make a call, to do that action. But we need to engage in what we call sacred gossip. And that is tell five friends, call your parents. This is a moral catastrophe waiting to happen. So again, the tools are there. If you're a first timer, we need you in the fight. We need you to share the sacred gossip. Together we can win, but not if they don't hear us. So good luck with that. We need you. Do it quickly. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Laura. I like that sacred gossip. We'll use that one. Look, I want to tell all three of you, thank you so much, Sakina Shabazz, Laura Peralta Schulte, and Maggie Siddiqui, for the work that you're doing on the policy level and in your communities. Also, want to thank the BJC, the Network Lobby, and Bread for the World, because I know none of us do this work by ourselves. We're doing it collectively. And the thing is, some people might be watching this and be like, okay, this is BJC. Why did BJC talk about SNAP and talk about Medicaid and also talk about all the other issues? Because all of these things are interconnected. And Christian nationalism has been a driving force for these issues, causing problems to marginalize and dehumanize communities. And we need to talk about it. And so it is so important that we pay attention to what has been shared today and understand what's at stake for our communities. Remember the people that you love, the people that you care for. Who is your why? Why do you get up every morning? Also remembering that there are more provisions that are in the bill that are horrible. So tell your elected official to say no. The phone number to the switchboard, the Capitol switchboard, is 202-224-3121. I will tell you again, 202-224-3121. Call and you can ask for your representative. Sometimes you'll get a voicemail, sometimes you'll get an aide. Tell them your story. They need to hear from you, but make sure that they're opposing this bill. And the last thing that I want you all to remember is that we're not powerless and we're not voiceless. We're going to use our voices. We're going to use our power collectively and protect all of us and make sure that everyone has the right to live, to thrive, and to be in society and live according to their conscience and beliefs. And so with that, I want to say thank you again for joining us. We will send out information to you, but I want to leave you with these words by Nelson Mandela. He said, overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity. It is an act of justice. It is a protection of a fundamental human right, the right to dignity and a decent life. So I want you to remember that as you go forward. Contact your elected officials. Again, thank you to all of our presenters. And please reach out to us if you have any questions. We're here to help. Thank you, and you have a great day and be safe. Bye bye.